All right. Well, Michael, thanks so much for joining me today on the podcast. Appreciate your time.
Thanks, buddy. Thanks for having me. Excited to get started.
Of course, man. Yeah, you've obviously got a really interesting background and working on some really amazing things today. But yeah, would love to kind of start at the start. And, obviously you had time at Google. You've had a few other roles as well before founding Leesy. But I guess, were you always entrepreneurial, or did you always kind of want to start your own business eventually at one point?
Yeah, I was a bit of a strange one in that when I was in like year 4 or 5, I'd have like these little notebooks that I would carry around before technology, right? And I'd write my little ideas in them. So like the earliest one I tried to work with my dad on to get a patent, which we never went anywhere, was like a weighted wheel on a bike. So you could like detach the weight from the wheel and it would keep spinning, and then you could reattach the weight to give you a little bit of a boost. Just like little ideas like that as, a kid being like, okay, what if we did this differently? And I remember that came from like spinners, back in the rap days where Pimp My Ride was a thing, everyone had spinners. So anyway, but yes, the short story is that always been trying to, come up with creative ways to solve problems or create things that are cool. And yeah, I took that from, that early childhood, pretty much at every stage through high school. I was doing, engineering subjects, physics, maths, all that kind of stuff, as well as, entrepreneurial things. And then at uni, I studied, it's called innovation engineering, which is like the commercialization of technical ideas, with a major in mechanical engineering, which is like a mini MBA. So it has like engineering with like accounting, finance, Salesforce management, you name it. It has like all these other little courses. And I was actually the first year to do it at UTS when it came out. So it was an amazing program, exactly what I wanted to do. So that's how I kind of kept on following that path.
Amazing, man. And yeah, I'd be curious to understand like your initial journey, because obviously you had a few different roles and you were a product manager at Google. I guess, did you have like a big master plan of like, okay, I'm going to go do all these different roles and then I'm going to start my own thing? Or did you kind of like stumble through it, or what was your kind of mindset around those early days? Yeah.
So another reason I went to UTS, which is like University of Technology Sydney, is because they have compulsory 2 6-month full-time internships as part of your degree. You have to do them. So the first one was at a engineering company where it was like pump manufacturing. It was really cool because we were doing CAD modeling and there was actually like a smelter on site and stuff like that. But when I was like suggesting changes and stuff, they're like, we haven't changed these pumps in like 50 to 100 years. And I was like, I have to get out. And so the second one was like at a more innovative little company. I liked, that it was a smaller company that I could actually come up with ideas and implement stuff. And then after that one, I went to an unpaid internship at Fishburners, and they billeted you out to a startup. And so that's when I was still at university. I was in there and I was, getting paid nothing, walking to Fishburners with a massive smile on my face saying, this is great. This is exactly what I want to do for the rest of my life. And yeah, that was pretty much, I continued on from there. I went from that internship, I ended up working at the company for nearly 2.5 years. First as like an engineer doing like 3D printing, circuit designs, running pilot experiment programs, to the point where it was commercializable. And that's when I really moved into like a product manager role, which is way more what I love doing.
And was that like I guess that product manager role that you ended up going down that path, was that like a process of iteration where you sort of just wanted to be exposed to startups in general and then you kind of found that you were good at that and you enjoyed that? Or was that right from the start? You just had that in your mind of like, this is what I love?
Well, I always wanted to start my own businesses and invent things. And, I always wanted to start them. For me, even when I was young, I was kind of all thinking about how do I create my own business? How do I be a CEO? I wasn't explicitly saying that, but I was always kind of on that path. And so product manager, there was a CEO of a startup, right? And so product manager was me just being able to determine more about like how features were designed, like what problems they were solving, interaction between users and engineering. It was just a natural fit for me. I am an engineer by trade, but I love being a boffin from time to time, but I way more prefer like the multidisciplinary, nature of product and then CEO. So that was kind of very natural progression for me from boffin to like more, I would say wider discipline.
Yeah, cool, man. And I guess how did that kind of lead you? How did you end up at Google? What was that kind of path to that point?
Yeah, well, actually, towards the end of that time, startup was like the natural thing where you're moving out and you're trying to get a home with your friends. And it was me and two other people trying to get a home. And we were just struggling. It was the classic thing in Sydney or any big developed country, developed city, where you go into these open houses and, the properties look nothing like the photos, but you're there with 30 other people. So you're like trying to hustle, you're trying to get in there. We had pretty good jobs and we're all really respectful, but we were just getting nowhere. Ultimately, we took some massively rundown place and, moved in and was struggling from then on. And there was just one day where like a friend of mine was like, how are like so many people doing this? And, it's not a better experience. Like, so many of us are renters, so many of like all of our friends and family had struggled through the same processes, same experiences. And that's actually when I left the startup to actually solve the same problem that I'm solving today. So I actually started trying to solve this problem about 7-8 years ago. Unfortunately, we didn't have the technology to kind of build what we were trying to build, which, has changed since then. And also I didn't have the skills, knowledge, network, resources to be able to execute my vision for, solving the rental space. And so that's when I did a 5-year plan to start my own company. And I said, if I want to start my own company in 5 years, what do I need to do in 3 years to make that as successful as possible? And in my mind, even back then, I literally said to my parents, well, the best thing would be at a large tech company where I can, build global products, demonstrate to like investors that, I have the skills, knowledge and expertise to like do this and, make a great network. And I said, okay, well, if I'm going to try and do that from 3 years to 4 years, then what do I need to do from like 1 year to 3 years in order to get that job? And I went, well, I'm probably going to have to, go to San Francisco. And I'm probably going to have to work at, at a smaller tech company because I won't have the background to be able to get in a big one. And I want to learn really fast. I want to go from Michael Watson from UTS Australia, hillbilly, with no background into like, oh, wow, this person's one of the better, if not one of the best kind of product people in the world. And I was still set on going back to product because I said that's the core of any business is a great product. So if I can not have to take on all the peripherals of a CEO and I just focus on product for the next 5 years, I should be really, really good at that after 5 years. And so after thinking about it more and more, I ended up going for a job at a product development consultancy, which meant that you go into companies, you look at their business, you have your own team of engineers, designers, etc., and you build products for them within very short amount of time. So like timeframes of 2 months to 6 months, you take it to market, you scale it, and then you move on and you hand that product back to their team. Why I wanted to do that is because I would get exposure to a whole range of different industries, a whole range of different product types. I would make huge networks very quickly. And I kind of saw it as going to the gym and doing lots of reps really quickly. And ultimately that's what I did. Back then, the startup ended, the startup that I'd created ended. And I surprisingly, this was pre-COVID, I got a job via Zoom after 5 interviews. And I'd never been to San Francisco. I didn't know where it was. I actually thought it was a lot closer to LA. I thought it was a lot warmer. And they flew me out. They paid for my visa. And I remember being on the plane being like, I don't know anyone in San Francisco, not a single person. I did a couple of Facebook shout outs because that was cool at the time. Made a couple of random intros, but yeah, it was me with a couple of bags going to San Francisco to follow what I thought was probably the best path towards achieving my goal of building a real tech business. So surprisingly, that's actually what happened. I went to this company called Originate for 2 years, learned a lot, met a lot of great people, did a whole range of strange and wonderful products that we can talk about if you'd like to get into them. But then after that, that's when Google came knocking.
Yeah, so interesting. I got a few questions on that whole journey. So first of all, how old were you when you made that 5-year plan?
I was 25 and I wanted to start my company before 30.
Amazing. Well, I'm curious, like, how did you have the kind of foresight around that? Because again, I feel like 25, obviously you had a bit of experience, done a few things, but I think it's still, in today's world, it's somewhat rare, you could say, for people to really sit down and just be like, hey, like, where do I want to be in 5 years and what are the steps I need to take to do that? Like, did you have a specific process or inspiration for doing that, or?
Yes. Yeah, there was a couple of books I was reading. I think it was kind of around, I think it was 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. I think it was like what's within your scope of knowledge and control. And there was a couple of other books as well that I was reading that was around goal planning and timelines. I've always been a planner. You know, like that's part of my DNA is like plan. Because I find when you plan, you generally get pretty close to that plan. And so it's kind of been a mashup of a whole heap of different things. But that is truly what if anyone's going through a career change or thinking about anything or have some grand plan, what I ask them, and actually it's an interview question that we have as well, is I talk to them about, what do you want to do in 5 years? And I go, okay, well, if you want to do that in 5 years, what do we think we can have to do in 3 years? Or if we're going to have to do that in 3 years, like what are we going to have to do in 1 year? Because if you do that, you can achieve pretty much anything in 5 years if you really push yourself. And so yeah, that's kind of how I came up with that approach.
Yeah, it's so interesting. And it comes back to that point, which many people say, of you kind of underestimate what you can do in 1 year or overestimate what you can do in 1 year and underestimate what you can do in 5 or 10 years, which is exactly what you kind of did. And so, yeah, it's just great that you had that kind of foresight to put you in this position where you are now. And yeah, the other point I was going to ask is around, you mentioned in Originate, you had some really interesting projects. Could you just like give 1 or 2 examples of some fun ones?
Yeah. So like the first one I did when I was there, we established, grew, and, ran the 3rd biggest commercial real estate marketplace in the US. It was called Commercial Search by Xceligent. It's now defunct, that one, unfortunately. But obviously the learnings are directly transferable to what we're doing today with Leesy. Another one was a keyboard app that had a patent on switching logos out, and we were showing ways to commercialize it so they could start negotiating with Snapchat. There was a high-frequency trading platform for the German stock exchange that we did out of Prague. There was an education platform for some people out in Nevada. There was an insurance help center platform for people out of Massachusetts, I think that one. That one was a bit of a weird place to fly into. But there was just so many different things. So many, like lots, some were consumer, some were B2B, some were pure tech plays, some were, marketplaces. Like I cannot think of a better place to, if you love building products, to find what you actually love.
Yeah, so interesting. And like, as you said, so many of them it was just completely different industries, completely different business types. And I can just imagine that would have just given you such a both breadth and also depth of experience in building product and really setting you up for what you're doing now. So again, kind of like a perfect piece of the master plan.
Well, yeah, the master plan was like, that was from 0 to 1 a lot across a whole heap of industries, or 0 to, 1 plus N, not too many.
Mm-hmm.
And then the next phase was, what is N, N to infinity? Like how does a business change from that to that? And what type of structures and reporting and HR. And, I went to Google, not just like learning product. I like studied their business. How do they do recruiting? How do they do, try and remove bias from recruiting? How do they recruit the best? Obviously it's a brand name, but they have other stuff going on. How do they create culture? What are the bad things and the good things about the culture there? How do you remain innovative at that scale? Because there's pockets of Google that remains innovative and there's pockets that don't, but it's designed that way. They design a lot of their business to achieve certain outcomes. And if you're studying the business, it's helped me think about not what we're just doing today, but like what's 3 steps, 6 steps, 24,000 steps ahead of where we are. How do I think the business is going to need to change and grow?
Yeah, so interesting. do you feel like most people or many people who I guess like, because many people I think have a similar plan of like, okay, I'm going to go work at a big tech company, get learnings, and then maybe do something myself. Maybe they don't necessarily think it out that step by step, but I'm sure it's an idea for many people. Do you think, were other people at Google like having that same mindset of like, I need to study the business, see how they're doing like recruiting, what's the culture like, or were you kind of like an anomaly in that regard?
Yeah, so I would say like a 1 to 5% probably are there doing that. We were definitely outliers. Like I describe Google as like you're a racehorse. They send you out to pasture, they look after you, they make sure you don't have a care in the world, you have no stress, and every once in a while they say run really, really fast at this one thing, be really, really good at that. And then they make your life perfect. Like there's doctors on site, like I was down at head office, which is literally a day spa with occasional offices. And yeah, like the lifestyle is a lifer. Like there's, like I said, there's no way you can make that money pretty much anywhere else. Like I come back here and the money I was making in the US was a senior executive, like the top of the food chain in Combank, and I was pretty low run product manager at Google. So it's rare that people are getting out. And it actually very much changed how I approached the products that I was building and the intensity I brought to them. Right. And, I very much understand the social dynamics of large organizations and people you're dealing with. It's a negotiation. And if you're pushing a hard bargain or you're going in strong for like certain things and trying to push a hard timeline that goes against the organization's general flow of timelines, you're going to break eggs. And you're, not going to be everyone's favorite person. You're not going to go up for promotion after promotion. But I wasn't looking at it like a lifer. I wasn't trying to go level. I was like build ship, move, build ship, build, move. Like I was looking at it again like reps. And you can see other people that are doing that. And, like you can tell people that there's also a standard kind of workflow of people coming from like MIT or Stanford or something like that. It's their first or second job out. This was their goal. This was their end point. They're happy and they're lifers. That just wasn't me. I'm like a scrappy startup person that was like, oh my God, this is pretty boring from time to time. Like I'm doing one page for weeks on end, but the page you're developing is crazy because, I was shipping some features. It was relating to like the family infrastructure. So, the relationship between a family. Sometimes the discussion's like, okay, what happens in India in a domestic abuse situation where someone's trying to, keep the wife under wraps, and is this gonna, inflict this? And you're like, oh my God, like I never had to think about that when I was doing a startup in Australia or these other small things. But really it shows like the breadth of the product and what level you can think about product and the impact. And at Google, they describe something as no such thing as an edge case, because an edge case is 100,000, 200,000, 1 million people. Because we were doing a lot of stuff on Android, which is like 2 billion devices floating around. So yeah, like 1% still a lot of people.
Yeah. Wow. Yeah, it's crazy. It must have been an incredible experience. I guess, was there any, you sort of, I guess, always had the intention that you were going to leave and start your own thing, but was there, while you were there, was there like 1 or 2 major things that you took away or just big learnings from being in that environment?
Yeah, like the big learning was around like data and like ML, right? Like I had an amazing experience there. Like I got to manage products that most could only dream of at Google because of the breadth of what I got to change. Like my big project that I kind of left Google on a high note with was launching a thing called Teacher Approved, which is like editor's choice, but for kids, apps, games, and movies. At the surface, it looks like editor's choice, but underneath it, it's actually, we evaluated every app for kids, so 50,000 apps, against a child development rubric that we developed with Harvard. And so we actually came out with really detailed, scales of how good these apps are. And we literally changed every part of the app store to make it easy for parents to find high quality educational content for their kids. And that was for specific age ranges and stuff like that. And so, yeah, we got to change like the Google Brain ranking algorithm within Google Play. I got to do like automatic detection algorithms for user behavior, like detecting who's a parent before they've explicitly said stuff like that. I got to change merchandising. I got to get rid of a lot of ads. So I actually got to cut out, millions of dollars of advertising revenue because of the strategic initiative we were doing. And then I also got to change the design. So we moved from tab 7, so off view, to tab 3, which is on view, which has monumental impacts on a multi-billion-dollar business. So the discussions to do that were just amazing learning. Like, you have to have your social manipulation, I suppose, for lack of a better word, really down pat. Like, you need all your chess pieces approving you to do that before you even go into meetings. You need all the data. You need the experimentation plan. You need the loss attribution, because there's loss across. When you change anything, there's winners and losers. We needed like detailed analysis of all of that kind of stuff. So yeah, it was just a different level of rigor to product that you will never get anywhere else. It's not something I bring to today. I bring elements of it to today. But it's great to know where the ceiling is.
Yeah, 100%. Sometimes that's just the thing. You want to experience, like, as you mentioned, like how high that ceiling is. And then again, it doesn't mean you have to take that everything into what you're doing now, but to at least having experienced that and kind of expanded your mind in that way, it gives you a good frame of reference for what you're doing now. Which, yeah, would love to kind of to learn a bit more about that. So I think obviously you're working on Leesy now. So would love to just kind of understand like the background story. I think it kind of started in 2017 when you moved to San Francisco. That was maybe the first experience you had firsthand with the problem. Maybe you could just share how you kind of came across the problem and now what you're working on. Yeah.
So at the highest level, Leesy's making the renting generation love renting. It's a big statement. It's got a lot to it, and there's for a reason. This isn't something small that we're thinking of trying to build quickly and sell. Like, this is a fundamental change, we think, in the way that people live their lives, and renters specifically. Like we talked about a little bit earlier, after leaving the first startup, I tried to start my own startup, very much in the same space, how to help renters find secure and live in properties. Even though I went to San Francisco to work at other companies, it didn't stop me, interacting with the rental industry. So the first landing in San Francisco, like I said, is like, I was going there knowing nothing about the place. I had a new job, so I was working hard. I was setting up my life there. What that meant is like finding a rental property in San Francisco, which is another crazy market, was near impossible. I just couldn't get to all these open houses. I was at the bottom of the application pile because I was an international, even though I was willing to pay thousands of dollars. Like, I would have easily paid thousands of dollars just to secure this place that was half decent. But that wasn't the case. I ended up in the Tenderloin, which, if you don't know the Tenderloin, it is, it's like King's Cross on steroids, or King's Cross of Sydney on steroids. I don't know a Melbourne equivalent to that. Is there a dodgy part of Melbourne?
Yeah, I think King's Cross is probably the best example I could think of.
Yeah, it's whenever you see problems with San Francisco, it's Tenderloin. So there's like open drug dealing, there's needles on the ground, homeless camps everywhere. So I ended up having to live there because that's the only place I could find, because I was running out of money in Airbnbs and stuff like that. And yeah, every night was a grind going home. I felt stressed even after finishing work. I'd wake up multiple times in a month hearing like crack addicts fighting in the middle of the night. I didn't really like San Francisco. No one would come near my house. If I was like with friends, we'd always go somewhere else. It was just a horrible experience. And that was the first year in San Francisco until I could get out of that lease. And so it was another thing where I'm like, I'm in San Francisco and this is just horrible. Like, this should be the place where there is something better. But I was still using Craigslist, really. And it's still today, people using Craigslist. Like, it's a big thing in the US. So I was like, this is crazy. So like, even that whole time I was going to open houses. I was going to open houses for properties, or like they're mainly private inspections really in San Francisco. I was going to ones for like mansions and really shit apartments. Because I was like, how does this work? Like, what is going on here? Like, how are these businesses wasting money? Are they like doing anything to make it? So I was kind of already still like just still thinking of that startup. And then actually after that year, what I did was I moved into a new place. Moved into a new place with two friends. We got a notification for this place probably at like 2 p.m., maybe 1 p.m. We'd called the real estate straight away. Say, hey, can we come see it today? He's like, oh, could you come see it tomorrow? We're like, no, we are not coming to see it today. We're seeing it today. And he's like, oh, I'll call the tenant. Tried to get access, got access. Said, well, you have to be there in an hour. So I left work. My two housemates left work. Just left. We've got to go. There's a house that could be interesting. We got there. We loved it, even though there was still like a whole heap of renters there, and they were like, who are these people walking through our place? And we said, can we take it? And he's like, what? He's like, yeah, we want to take it right now. He's like, oh, I didn't do paperwork and stuff. It was like, we could do it right now. And he says like, oh, okay. He's like, but you need to pay $6,000 cash. You need to pay $6,000 holding deposit. We're like, cool. Will you take cash? He's like, I'd rather check. I'm like, we're not waiting 3 days for that check to land in your thing. We're going to get you cash. He's like, oh, okay. So he gave this guy $6,000 cash on the back of a Dodge Charger. We had to take photos of it and shit. But like to secure this place, because that's how crazy the market is there. If you're not hustling that hard, you're not getting a home. But the net result of that was that I flourished. I loved San Francisco. I had a great time with my friends. I ultimately got a job at Google because I think I was in a much better mental space. And again, that's just one of these things where it's like your home impacts every aspect of your life. If you're in a home that doesn't work for your lifestyle, it's a massive grind on your life. It has massive, negative impacts on your life. When you're in the opposite, it's all roses. Like you can become who you should become. And, that is, again, like these things where I'm like, this is crazy. Like, how is this not, a thing? But I wasn't going to just dive back into it because it's the thing I thought of first. I was, as part of my Google job, because we were a global company, we did global user research. And what I actually did in one of my research studies is I added 5 questions to the end of it, which was like, what do you think is going to be solved in the next 5 years through technology? What do you wish would be solved in the next 5 years into technology? What don't you think is going to be solved in the next 5 years in technology? And I just used it as like free user research. So hopefully that's not something I can get in trouble for. But I got, and these reports were done by the best user researchers in the world. It was done by it was 10 families in 5 countries spread across the world. So you got a whole demographic. Obviously, I've always had, visions of a global product. And so, I also explored, how to revolutionize cooking at home, because everyone hates that. How to revolutionize cleaning at home, how to revolutionize cleaning your clothes at home, and a couple other things. But yeah, ultimately looking at all of these versus Leesy, Leesy was by far the biggest opportunity that no one else was as well positioned as me to solve.
Yeah, it's so interesting. I guess even just on what you were saying before around that story, it's just crazy how, something that sounds so simple, or everyone needs it. Everyone needs shelter. It's like food and shelter, the most important thing. And so everyone needs to find a rental property if they're renting. But the fact that you, like yourself as someone, you're living with other friends, so like money is not an issue. You all have good jobs, like respectable people in society. And even though that's the case, you still had to like hustle so hard just to even get that property. And so the fact that is even the case is just like obviously a huge like friction and pain point. And then I think it's super interesting as well how you then went a step further in terms of validating that and maybe sneakily using a bit of Google's resources, but which is always good. But yeah, I guess like was there anything else you used to kind of validate the idea, or any other kind of techniques or just approaches just to make sure to sense check this idea in your head before you worked on it? Yeah,
absolutely. I'm a pessimist at heart, even though I'm an entrepreneur, which is generally an optimist. So what I was doing is I was researching the market not only in San Francisco, but when I went to LA, I was going to open houses, stuff like that for work. Chicago did it the same thing. New York did it the same thing. When I was doing the German Stock Exchange, I was in Prague. I was doing the same thing, going to open houses, talking to people. What I did a lot was there's a rule book in a sales book that I read, which is like the arm length book. Have you heard of that?
No.
if you're within arm lengths of someone, you have to talk to them and find out what they do and talk about your business. So I use that to be like talking to people about renting it on bus stops. Like I was that crazy person like, oh, please don't talk to me. But it's like, hey, are you a renter? And you'd be like, yes. And I was like, oh, cool. How is this? Blah, 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 blah. So I would just get a cross section of the whole. I try to get as many interviews and cross sections as I could, even if they were like 5-minute conversations. But yeah, so pubs were great, parks were great, beaches were great, bus stops great. Just get out there and talk to a lot of renters. And then on the flip side, when I was going to agencies, I pretended to have properties. So I put in application, hey, can you come back to what's your cost basis? How do you do this? At the open houses, I was talking to the agent. Oh, okay, so what do you do? Like, okay, like, have you been doing that long? Like, what do you like? Blah, 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 blah. Just, a real talker. And, one of the great things that my co-founder, Nick, taught me when we worked together at the company before Google, which was Originate, he taught me all the value of user research, how to do it properly. If you want to learn more about user research, read Nielsen Norman. They are the best at like user research strategy and tasks. And I learned a lot from the people at Google about how to do it really well as well, like methodically. And I took that to my agile kind of approach, like leading unbiased questioning, open-ended questioning, that kind of stuff. But that really was the foundation by which I could say, it's not just me. And there's very common problems, and all these problems are solvable with technology. And the business model of these people that on the other side is broken and they've got their own pains. And this solution, I looked at so many different iterations of the solution. I looked at the different model or proper model or what's the one in the US? There's a couple in the US that have similar things, and in Europe, which is just like really low cost property management from a technology perspective. And I was like, it's not a 10x. My acquisition's not going to go really quickly. It's going to be a brutal kind of approach. I looked at, cutting out the property managers. I looked at all this kind of stuff, but ultimately through years of iteration came up with something that I think aligns all the needs and wants of the 3 key stakeholders in our business, which is renters, property managers and landlords. So it's not the most obvious solution, but I think it's really the only one that will work because I looked at pretty much every other one that I could think of and found reasons why I don't think that's going to work.
Yeah, cool. And I guess could you go into a bit of details about exactly, how are you kind of solving this problem of making the renting generation love renting?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'll look at the flip side a little bit and say why do people buy? Because buying's crazy. Who's going to leverage themselves up to the eyeballs for a home and they're going to have to live in that home for 30 years, that one home, when everyone knows your life changes, drastically over 5 to 10 years. So to me, I was like, this is crazy. We're leveraging ourselves up to the eyeballs. So I kind of looked at it as okay, well, people want the financial upside of property. Property is a great investment. There's social norms there. You have social pressure to buy a house because everyone says it's the big thing to do. You want the stability. You don't want to be able to, you don't want to have to move because moving sucks and finding a place sucks. And it's a core problem that we're going to get into. And you don't want to be told to have to leave, and you want to be able to customize that property to make it yours. Because you don't want to feel like someone else's. So I was like, okay, well, those are some things that I think we can bring into the rental space just through incentives, products, features, functionality. And then I was like, but are there good things about renting? And then I was like, yeah, there's great things about renting. You don't have that crippling 30-year mortgage. I wouldn't be able to start this business if I had a crippling 30-year mortgage. And just for the record, I am a renter and I believe I'll be a renter for life. If I buy a house, maybe in 10 years, you can hit me up. But yeah, I'm like, I wouldn't be able to start this business because I wouldn't have the freedom to be able to take zero salary and live off my own, savings for a while. And then also, I can move. I can move from a 1-bedder to a 2-bedder. I can move from a 2-bedder to a house. I can move from a house back into a 2-bedder in 5-year increments as my lifestyle changes. So I was like, well, that's better than, if I bring those good things into renting and keep the best things about renting, that seems way better than buying to me. And so that was really the problem and solution space that we're operating in. And ultimately it is really what we're building at Leesy is like how to make renters feel settled into a home they love, because the feeling of unsettlement is at the core of the problem. If you talk to any renter, it's like, I'm unsettled about the low vacancy rate. I'm unsettled about price increases. I'm unsettled about eviction. I'm unsettled about my rights as a renter. Like, I'm unsettled about feeling like a guest in someone else's house. Like, it really is this unsettlement that is like this cloud above all renters, even though sometimes it's clear and sometimes it's not clear. And that's what we're solving through products, features, and functionality. The first one that we're building out, and we can get into why we chose that a little bit later, is we're making rental homes reservable like an Airbnb. So instead of going to open houses and going through application processes and wasting weekend after weekend after weekend and being really frustrated and upset, we believe leveraging the emergent technology, which is virtual tour technology, it's made it possible to make an experience similar to Airbnb, but a little bit more involved, because renters are a more involved transaction. And so like what we're building right now is a platform when renters can come to our platform, upload their information, be sent properties that meet their needs and they've been pre-approved for. They can then digitally inspect those properties and see all the information they need to make a decision within our platform. So the digital inspections are using virtual tours, which is like Google Street View for a property. You can explore it, you can look up and down, you can understand layout, etc. And then after you find a property you love and have been pre-approved for, you can pay to reserve it. And that takes it off the market for anyone else. After which you have the option to physically inspect it as a bit of a sanity check before signing the lease and paying the deposit. And that, has a range of benefits. For the renter, the easiest one is like there's no stress involved. You can secure your next rental home you love from the comfort of your couch. For the agency who, are under really large staffing shortages and, eroding profit margins, that actually delivers them the outcome they want, which is a new tenant without them having to leave the office. So that's a real win for them from a profitability perspective, from, alleviating their staffing constraints. And for the landlord, what this actually does to them is pretty much minimizes or eliminates vacancy rates, which is great. You don't have any dead time. It reduces how much they're going to be charged for management and leasing, which is obviously a great win for them. And then it also increases the potential market for their property, because you're not reliant on this, really small bottleneck, which is a 15-minute open house, to pretty much, get all the renters through. If you have a market which is say 100%, 5% can go to that open house. So you've eliminated 95% potential renters from leasing your property. And then after that, you have an application process, which is another 5% reduction. So because it's digital, you go from 100% to 100 to 100. That's actually going to lead to the people willing to pay and are approvable will get the property, which in a free market, that's exactly what you want.
Yeah, and so again, instead of like in your situation where you had to rush out of your office in the middle of a workday and then put the cash down on the back of the Dodge truck, it's just a much more seamless experience of, hey, this property just got listed, let's do this virtual tour. It's one gripe I always have when you look on all the listings and like all the photos are very like strategic and you can't actually see like the proper layout, and even if there's a floor plan, and so it's like you can get a real solid understanding of what it looks like and what it is. And then, yeah, if it's suitable, you could just pay to reserve it. That's such a big pain point that it makes sense. Like consumers should be willing to pay for that. And so, just overall, it's a way better experience. And then it helps, as you mentioned, not just the tenant, but also the landlords and the agents, which again, everyone just wins, which is the perfect solution, really. So.
Yeah, like we need it. We need everyone pushing in the right direction. And, not only are the stakeholders aligned on what the outcome will be, like the macroeconomic pressures around the economy are saying that this has to happen. There needs to be changes in the way that the rental market works. Otherwise, it's just going to get more and more fractured, more and more, of a negative experience.
Yeah, can you talk a bit more about that? Because I guess one thing I'm curious is obviously renting's not a new thing. A lot of these issues have been prevalent for many years, as you've experienced personally, and many others. So why is now the right time? What's the kind of macroeconomic drivers that are kind of making this inevitable, as you said?
Yeah, I think this goes back to so we looked at this when we're making a decision on where to start, because we have ideas on how to improve the whole end-to-end renting experience, and make this whole experience better. But we really need to start with a beachhead that makes the most sense and enables us to quickly achieve market penetration and a global reach. And so what we looked at, we said, okay, well, how are the macro environment affecting this industry? And the first things first is the core thing is renting sucks. For the consumer, the renter, it sucks. It sucks from start, finish, middle, and end. It's not a great experience. And we said, okay, well, what's going to affect that? Is it going to get worse or is it going to get better? And the number one thing that affects that is supply. Can you buy homes? Are people going to be buying more homes? So what we're seeing is that over the last couple of years and into the next 10 years, we're seeing that affordability is going to continue to get worse. So people aren't going to be buying their first home. It's actually going to be less and less. And even some people are going to be selling their home and coming back to renting. This is as interest rates rise, and income inequality actually continues to get worse. So we're okay, well, we're going to have more renters renting for longer. What about the supply of rental homes? Is that going to change significantly in the next 10 years? And the government is, to their credit, they recently made some changes that makes the build to rent industry more profitable, which means obviously it gets more investment and more accessible. And we believe, over 10 years, sure, they're going to introduce some pretty sizable amount of supply, but, it's not going to come anytime soon. So, I kind of think that, within 5 to 10% of the market potentially could be built to rent in, the next 10 years. But with peaks in, student immigration and immigration as a whole, plus, the building industry grinding to a halt, it's not going to be enough. Just the next 10 years is going to get worse from a, vacancy rate perspective. So we're saying, okay, supply is going to get worse and there are going to be more renters. What about the people that own it? We've just talked about build to rent, which is like a Mervac. Build to rent, if you don't know what it is they build apartment blocks and they build them and design them specifically as an asset class they hold forever in perpetuity. They never get rid of them. So it's not build to sell, which is the classic thing that everyone thinks about. So this is a newer model that's, massive in the US, some penetration in EU and UK. But in Australia, it's going to be booming and Mervac's betting the house on it. So you're going to see a lot of this come through. And also the government's betting the house on it as well. So really, we see that obviously those people are going to come through. They're going to be big companies and probably superannuation funds that own those type of things. So they're going to, they're going to be owners, but the vast majority is still going to be mum and pop owners, right? The environment in Australia, US, UK and stuff is that the vast majority of investment properties are owned by owners with one or two investment properties. It's 70% plus. And we don't see any change in that anytime soon. However, we do see them being under more pressure, right? Their interest rates are going to rise. That means their mortgage payments rise. That means they can no longer sit back and just take capital appreciation. They need to look at yield. So they're going to be under pressure themselves. They're going to say, hey, how do I maximize my yield? And to maximize yield, there's three options. Reduce vacancy as much as possible, increase rent as much as possible, and then decrease management costs as much as possible. And we're okay, well, that's interesting. Who are managing these properties, and how will that change? Because we don't think ownership's going to change that much. What about property management and who are doing that? So in Australia, the numbers are 25% of properties are self-managed and 75% are professional property managers. In the US, it's about 50-50. UK, it's pretty similar. My understanding is a little bit more property management. But in all of these markets, property management's growing, right? It actually is quite counter to what I thought it was going to be. I thought it was going to be more self-managed. And when looking into it, the whole thing that we realized is that the trend is being driven. Well, there are two reasons someone self-manages. One is they don't trust anyone to manage their property. I don't think that's going to change. There's going to be that percentage that does it. The other is actually cost driven. I don't think property managers are worth it. Do enough for their 5 to 6%, which is a lot of work for 5 to 6%. Now we would go, okay, well, what about these property managers? Like, what's going to change with them? Is that going to change this dynamic? And what you should realize about property management is that the way that people win managements, right? Say if you have an investment property, you're going, who should manage this? There's only 3 real people that has a potential to take your management. One is they sold you the property. That's the easiest one. You're like, hey, we also have a property manager. Come talk to them. And you're like, well, they sold me the house. They probably know the house. Should do that. The other is that they have an office down the road. And you're like, oh, they're the local one. They know the local environment, blah, 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 blah. And then the third one is that you know them since childhood, birth, and you're friends with them, so you just give it to them. Outside of that, it's very rare that you will find anyone else. Like, we talk to agencies all the time and they're like, it's less than 1% of my managements will come through Facebook or realestate.com or some cold walk through the front door kind of stuff. It's rare, really rare. And so we're like, okay, so it's, these localized competition is going to remain. So it's not going to be a new entrant. A couple of the new entrants have just closed. So Different and Proper both closed, which were probably the leading new entrants from a technology perspective. And the reason is because these really dominant local competition. They compete to establish a relationship. And if they both have a relationship, the unfortunate fact for them is there is very little service differentiation. So they just compete on price. Now, that's been happening for the last 10 years. It'll continue to happen for the next 10 years. But what that does is it reduces the cost of management. And so these self-managed people who were like, oh, it's too expensive, over time, they're coming more and more to the professional property managers because professional property management costs keep on going down. And we think that's just going to accelerate as these professional property managers continue to compete. So then we kind of looked at it and we were like, hey, what's happening with these professional property managers? Like, what's in their business? And what we found out is that 30% of property managers left the industry in the last 18 months. And that's a stat being put out by Ray White, like the head office. That means that you're in a severe shortage of property managers, right? We have ultra low unemployment, which means there's no one to fill those spots. And so these agency principals are in a bad position where their revenue is going down and their cost of their expenses is skyrocketing. And in lots of situations, they're having to come back and do property management themselves, which they hate.
Yeah, wouldn't do that.
No, generally they're some grey-haired, old, agency principals, female or male, and they like sales. Generally, the agency principals are on sales, and so coming back to property management, spending their Saturdays at open houses for a one bedder for $600, is not the best thing for them. And so what they're doing is investing as heavily as possible into outsourcing, automation, and efficiency, because that's the only way they're going to survive. That's the only way they're going to remain profitable and competitive. And so with all these things kind of playing into each other, we said, well, the other thing we looked at property managers, we said, like, how do they spend their time? Because if they're trying to like outsource and become more efficient. And what we found is that, 20% of their time is spent on rent arrears, or 10 to 20%. A big chunk is on maintenance, so between 60 to 70, and then the rest, which is about 30%, is spent on leasing. And for the most part, rent arrears and maintenance have been optimized and automated with software to the point of maximizing their impact. And now what's left is the very complicated human dynamic that the experienced property managers, like that's why they're paid, is to solve these complex problems, which, if an example for rent arrears is like, I got cancer, I lost my job, and now I'm behind. You can't just send like an automated chat GPT to go do that or whatever. Like, you need a human that's negotiating between them, the courts, and the landlord to come to a unique solution. Similarly with maintenance, like the time spent is like, the foundations are broken and we've got 3 quotes and, we need to finance it and something like that. Like, that's not nothing you can systemize and optimize. Whilst we looked at leasing and said, well, that's 30% of the time. And really that 30% is spent driving between open houses, opening doors, closing doors, answering the same 10 questions over and over again. looking at the same documentation, following up the same documentation, really just these things that, are completely optimizable. And the reason we looked into, again, the reason why that's not being done right now is the existing platforms, advertising platforms that are focused on property sales. Like your real estate domains, your Zillows in the US, probably like 85 to 90% of all their revenue is coming from like property sales ads and mortgages, and any other kind of affiliate transaction for them. So they don't really care about rentals. Like it's not something they're interested in. And the reason they're built around the open house inquiry flow of today is because that works for sales. Inefficiency is really good in sales because agencies get leads that they can potentially turn into sales leads, because anyone looking to buy a house is probably looking to sell one or has their own house. Whilst in renting, if you're a renter that doesn't rent that property, you're dead weight, because it's very rare that an agency can put them into any other property coming up for rent. And so these are all the reasons we went, wow, like, okay, so if we can come in and make rental homes reservable by digitizing and centralizing the process, we can mean that these renters that are stressed about, trying to find a home can secure it and have peace of mind by reserving it from the comfort of their couch. Like you said, these property managers can reduce the time they spend leasing by like 74%. So they can free up, a lot of time and effort in a way that was never possible before, whilst getting the ideal outcome within a quicker amount of time, which is a new tenant within hours, not weeks. And like we said before, the landlords that are trying to like maximize their yield, we eliminate that vacancy period. We reduce their management costs because there's cost savings there. And we maximize and optimize the rent they can get by increasing the total addressable market for that property by leveraging the digital environment. So that's why we chose that area as the area that aligns the needs of all those stakeholders.
Incredible, man. And yeah, you've really put a lot of thought into the product and even just the approach. And it's just makes sense if you can solve all the stakeholders' problems simultaneously through very thoughtful product, then it just makes sense. And I'd love to kind of, I guess, understand how things are going right now, like where you're at with Leesy, and again, what's kind of like the ultimate vision and where do you want to be eventually?
Yeah, so obviously this is the starting point, making rental homes reservable. We see that by helping people find and secure their next rental home, it's the very top of the spear. It's the very first point of someone interacting with this industry that is worth trillions of dollars, which is the rental industry. And it's something they're not familiar with or trustworthy. So we see an easy, extension from there is along the rental journey, maintaining that relationship with renters throughout that journey. We see a lot of opportunity making the moving process far less stressful by guiding people through the process, introducing them to trustworthy service providers, and obviously, taking a clip of the ticket along the way. So, through affiliate marketing and stuff like that. Examples are like the classics, like utility, moving, cleaning, all that type of stuff. There's some more interesting things like offering furnishing as an option on every property, because we see a lot of untapped demand there. So just, monthly furnishing costs, and monthly car parking that's not affiliated with the property, but 2 doors down. These are all things that just like add-ons that we can add there to make that whole experience better for renters. Beyond that, we see there's a huge opportunity for creating financial products for renters. What I like to call is like the Dolomite program for renters. They're generally underserved and generally like under-focused from, the large banks and financial providers, but we think we can add like a whole series of, features and functionality that reduce the burden of renting, and then also give people exposure to financial products that are derivatives of real estate. There's a lot of like real estate investment trusts, there's partial ownerships emerging, a whole heap of like even, rent to buy. These are all these type of things that come down from the leasing process. And then also we do see there's a lot of opportunity to leverage our unparalleled renter data, because we're collecting like what people are looking for, how much they want to pen, all their information, and our unparalleled property data, because we have virtual tours, which are complete 3D models of all the properties, to generate insights for the build to rent industry to make their, platforms and their projects stack up and become more financially viable and also high impact. So we provide that information to the build to rent industry, as well as the local councils and stuff like that in partnership to obviously make renting better, right? Create properties that renters actually want to live in. So that's really, part of the vision. There's a lot more when it comes down to like incentivizing long-term leases by creating incentives for both the renter and the owner, making, a whole heap of changes to the way that renters can live in their property.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, so all that being said is that there's a really big vision for all the things we're going to do to make renting the best possible lifestyle. The starting point where we're at today is we have leesy.com.au, and that's Leesy, Leesy, and that's the easy peasy way to sign a leasy. We want to make leasy vernacular like Uber, so order an Uber, sign a leasy. That's where we're going. Yes. So we have that website up and running. Renters are already coming to us telling us what they're looking for. We'll send them properties that we've got early access to. 30% of our listings include a 24 to 48 hour exclusivity window. Renters then digitally inspect those properties using virtual tours that our contractors are creating. This enables renters to identify whether or not they love a property in minutes instead of having to wait days or weeks for an open house. And then we're able to get our renters into these properties before the open house because they're highly qualified. We collect all their documentation up front, and the agencies really want to lease this thing as quickly as possible for the best price, and we're working with them there. So we're signing leases on an ongoing basis at the moment. It's really at our earliest stages. But we've seen, really rapid growth on the renter side over the last couple of months to the point where we have about 11% of all the active renters in the eastern suburbs of Sydney on our platform. And we have relationships with agencies that manage 9,000 rental properties. And that's probably about 17 or 18% of the eastern suburbs of Sydney. So we have some good foundations, but really what we're doing now is taking it from, clear validation of the problem, the space, the solution, and, leveraging the inherent competitive advantage of our digital platform to really turn it into like a business model that's flourishing. And so, so we're currently out talking to investors at the moment, looking to raise a seed round. And really that's, a huge opportunity for us because we think with this round, we'll be able to get to the point where we're defaulting alive, which is obviously a great point to be at this point, and delivering a lot of value for these renters and the agencies and landlords that all really want our solution.
Amazing. Yeah, it's so cool. And obviously kind of been following along the journey for the past 6 months or so. And it's just been incredible to see just the consistent kind of iteration and validation and growth that you've had just from the time that we've sort of known each other, which is awesome. And only exponential growth to come, which is great. So yeah, I guess you mentioned that you're raising a seed round soon. Are there any like specific kind of investors that you're looking for? If there's anyone listening who kind of loves the message and the vision that you have for Leesy, what kind of investors or what value do you want them to kind of bring to the table for this round? Yeah,
like if you're interested to find out more, just feel free to email me at Michael, Michael, at leesy.com.au. I'm always open for a discussion about the business that I love. I think the ideal investors are ones that really care about impacting people's lives. At our core, we're looking at this problem, and our mission really is to help everyone settle into a home they love. Because we, back to one of your earlier points, a home is the sense of security, is psychological safety, and renting is this massive growth segment of that market. So anyone that is motivated by those type of things is great, and is someone that we think we want to work with because we love working with people that actually care about what we're building rather than, just the business and money behind it. If someone has a background in real estate, either development or, real estate agencies, lovely to talk to them. Background in marketplaces, obviously that's, something that's close to our heart and part of our core dynamic. That'd be also really, really interesting. But, anyone and everyone, feel free to reach out. I'd love to chat.
Awesome, mate. Yeah, well, let's sort of close out here, Michael. Obviously great to kind of run through your background and everything that you've done in the past, and then with Leesy now, amazing journey. And again, as a renter myself, having gone through that painful journey many times, can't wait for the platform to expand even further, so you can just like forget about ever going through that experience again. But just a few quick questions to finish off. I guess, is there, you mentioned there was a few like books that were maybe impactful for you back in the day. I think before we started recording, you mentioned an interesting framework around books as well. So I guess would love to know like if there's any specific books or just resources that you've come across in your life or recently that really had an impact on you.
Yeah, so I'll give the tip that I said that I use, which I'm always an optimizer, trying to maximize the time is limited. So you need to make sure you're always working on the most impactful thing or reading the most impactful thing. So what I generally do is I ask anyone that I really respect and are interested in their opinion, what is their number one book that they would recommend, irrespective of business, life, whatever, just the number one book. And that's because they've read every other book and they think this book is the best book. So you inherently are constantly reading the highest impact book. That's the theory of it anyway. And do you know your book? What's your number one book?
Ooh, it's a good question. I've got a big bookshelf right here. So I think one that was really impactful for me was actually The Slight Edge by Jeff Olson. I don't know if you've read it. It's a really simple concept. It's basically the concept of compound interest essentially, but, applied to everything in life. And this kind of, I guess you could say the distinction between someone who gets what they want and someone who doesn't does not come down to like really big things or like sudden decisions or, oftentimes even in business, like we see someone succeed and we're like, oh, they had like that one deal that like got them to success. But in reality, what it usually is just like these small daily disciplines and decisions that just compound over time. And every day you're either making small decisions that move you closer to that or you're making small decisions that take you further away from it. But the thing that fucks most people up is that they're easy to do, but they're also easy not to do. So, it's easy to read 5 pages of a book every day. It's also easy not to. It's easy to go for a walk or get outside in the sun. It's also easy not to. But these like small decisions are the things that if you compound over decades, they're the things that add up and make the difference between success and failure. So I think just having that kind of long-term compounding view of things was just a really great mindset for me, especially early on. So I'd say that would be mine.
That's really interesting. I haven't read the book, but I do leverage a lot of the similar things in that I write goals for every day. And I have weekly goals and I have monthly goals and quarterly goals and yearly goals and 5-year goals, obviously. The goals for the day, there is one thing, and that is the only thing I need to do that day. And it has to be the most important thing. Because again, if you're working on the most important thing and getting the most important thing done every day, I believe there's like diminishing returns on everything else. Where, and I actually split it. I think it's from 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. Again, I split it across work, relationships, self-improvement, and tasks. And the first 3 probably make sense. Like work is just Leesy things. Relationships is like families, friends, making sure you're like touching base with someone. And then the third one is self-improvement, which is like gym, surfing, learning, anything that I want. Meditation we were talking about earlier. And the fourth one is tasks. And tasks is more just like life admin. If you're not doing life admin, the wheels will fall off. But I take that approach because there's always things to be done. And if you're doing that one thing every day, you should hopefully live a happy life and a balanced life, which is something else that is a challenge when you're going so hard at something. But yeah, that's really interesting. But my recommendation would be The Selfish Gene. It's by Richard Dawkins. Have you read it?
I haven't read it, no. It's actually on my shelf, but I haven't read it.
Really? It's so dense. It's so intense. But it got recommended by Jonathan Rosenberg, who was the kind of like there was the CEO, Eric Schmidt of Google for a long period. He was his left-hand man. He was the head of product at Google. And he recommended it to me. And that was a good number one person to recommend it to, because that was a crazy book. It changes your life. It's not business, but it's a really interesting read.
Amazing. Yeah, I've had it on my shelf for a while. I just haven't got around to reading. I think because of that reason, because it looks so dense.
It's so dense. It's like literally 2 pages. You're like, oh my God, like how did I not know this? Like, that's crazy. So
is there any like one or two main things you took from it?
Oh, actually, yeah. So he is the one that coined the term meme, right? That book is where meme was created, which is gene is human, and the selfish gene is like how gene is the core bit of evolution, and humans are like the transmission mechanism. So like it's kind of like fatalistic if you read it, but it's like an interesting framework. I actually looked at memes and was like, oh, that's so interesting that memes propagate and they're self-serving. And something that I'm meaning to be reaching out to Richard Dawkins to see if he's kind of gone that thought process. But my extension with the businesses are the mechanism for propagation, the most successful mechanism for propagation of ideas, which are memes. Because it's like all these memes joined together into a business, just like all these genes joined together for the human. Anyway, that was, if you read the first 10 pages, it sums up from the Big Bang to today in the most crystal clean, insightful, mind-blowing explanation of the world. So just read the first 10 pages and you will just not stop.
Amazing.
Yeah.
Cool. I'll make sure I definitely get to that soon. But yeah, I guess, is there anything else that I haven't asked you, Michael, or just anything that you really want to make sure you pass on to the audience, or any asks of people listening? Just anything we haven't covered that you really want to make sure that you do?
Yeah, look, to be honest, I'm just trying to make friends, like trying to get out there, for a long while when I was first in Australia in Fishburners, obviously I was deep into the startup space. And then I went away for 5 years or something. So now it's coming back, and big part of what makes startups successful is their ability to get out there, understand the wider ecosystem, network, have lots of conversations about what we're doing and why we're doing it, and make sure that people know that someone's solving this problem. And yeah, I think that, and the other thing would probably is like a little bit about our team, the wider team. It's not just me. Like I am a co-founder. We also have Nick, who's my design co-founder, or he's co-founder, but his background is in design across brand, etc. He rebranded Audi, the car company, and Deutsche Telekom before working with me at Originate and actually teaching me a lot about design. And then after that, he went and led design at Lumosity, which is the brain training app. He did that, a full kind of redesign of their portfolio for 2 years. So he's joining me. He's based out of Washington, DC. Then we have Nico Westerman. So he's leading our marketing at the moment. He led global digital marketing for Meta for 10 years. So obviously knows his way around the Meta infrastructure and has been kind of the driving force of us, rapidly growing our renter numbers. And then more recently, we've had Henry join the team. Now Henry's background is like a 20-year veteran engineer, a lot of experience at double-sided marketplaces. He's now leading up our engineering, and we're seeing really good progress on the product front since he's joined. And Jess has actually joined recently as well, kind of helping us out for the last couple of months on our leasing and listing operations. She has been like a GM at like a couple of Ray Whites, and then also was part of the leadership team for Proper in the operations and leasing side. So at this point, we think we've got, the well-rounded team that you need to execute on such a bold vision in this space. And we're just excited about what we can build together, given the right investment, given the right times, and, the opportunity we think ahead of us.
Amazing. Yeah, thanks for sharing that on the team, because again, you've managed to put together a phenomenal team, and everyone just brings to their own part of the business a phenomenal background and just execution and ability to get things done. So yeah, you're very well placed to execute hard now moving forward. But last question would just be, Michael, what's the best way for people to connect with you if they do want to be friends with you or reach out? What's the best
friendship, way? Yeah. Look, the easiest way is like Michael, Michael at leasy.com.au. Otherwise, LinkedIn, there's a lot of Michael Watsons. It's a pretty basic name. So you're going to have to type in Michael Watson Leesy, Leesy, into Google, and I should pop up on LinkedIn there. Feel free to add me. Those are the easiest ways to get in contact, or just go to leasy.com.au and, call that number. They'll put me through to me and I'll have a chat.
Sounds good. Easy. Well, thanks so much, Michael. Thanks for doing this interview. Really fascinating to just break down your journey and see where you've come from and where you're going with Leesy, and super excited to be on the journey. So thanks for today.
Awesome. Thanks, buddy.